this is America, and this is the online world that's become something of a MAGA sphere for Donald Trump. One prominent right-wing influencer here in the US has just moved from a pro-Russian position to suddenly backing Ukraine. I'll be asking whether Laura Loomer is a lone voice in a few minutes. First, though, here's Alex Marquardt.
Thank you, Richard. For nearly 4 years, support for Ukraine has divided Washington, and getting rid of U.S. backing for Ukraine has defined the America First movement's foreign policy. Many of President Donald Trump's strongest supporters opposed continued military aid going to Ukraine, arguing that the U.S. should focus on its own borders and its own economy. But one of the movement's most influential voices has taken a surprising turn. Laura Loomer. Her dramatic reversal on Ukraine and her high-profile interview with Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, has sparked a new question. Is MAGA quietly changing its position on the war, or is this simply one prominent Trump ally breaking ranks? Richard Gaisford takes us through these unexpected developments.
In a world where everyone can amplify their thoughts on social media, right-wing influencers have certainly found their place in Donald Trump's orbit. And at the heart of it has been Laura Loomer, a close confidant of the president and long-term critic of U.S. involvement in Ukraine.
And on today's episode, we're going to talk about how the United States government seems to have an obsession with sending our taxpayer money overseas to Ukraine so that they can keep on funding Nazism.
But the MAGA influencer U-turned after visiting Ukraine and interviewing Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
People love being keyboard warriors and saying things are fake, but they should come themselves. If they're so, I was once that person too, but then I decided to come to a war zone and see things for myself. So people can think what they want to think. Doesn't mean it's real.
Explaining her change of heart to Ukrainian television.
I personally feel it is my personal position that Ukraine should get access to Patriot missiles to defend themselves against Russia. I personally want Ukraine to win in this war against Russia.
Loomer says she's called to the U.S. president from Ukraine and will brief him on her return.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
Ukrainians hope that Donald Trump has been watching, having seen him berating their president at the White House.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards.
Right, Mr. President, is there no deal?
The administration cutting money from Ukraine, wanting to put America first.
It's one of the things I'm proudest that we've done as administration is we've told Europe that if you want to buy weapons, you can, but the United States is not buying weapons and sending them to Ukraine anymore. We're just out of that business. It's a very good thing.
Ukrainians have tried hard to grab the hearts and minds of U.S. decision makers, bringing a shrapnel-damaged slide from the Kyiv suburbs to their cultural center in the U.S. capital. It's where their most famous son also has his place. Well, this statue here in Washington is of Taras Shevchenko, a man who could be described as the original Ukrainian influencer. He really shaped the national identity through his poetry, his writing and his art. In the modern world, it's Zelenskyy making the case for his country using social media.
Vote is already at 61, so we are moving to this bill. It's going to pass.
He was also on Capitol Hill this week to see Lindsey Graham's Russia sanctions bill pass. But having influential American voices suddenly on side brings a chance to change the minds of Donald Trump's electoral base.
Ukraine is the enemy of this country.
Tim Pool's another MAGA influencer who's thought again about Ukraine.
Upon reflection, I now understand that Ukraine is our greatest ally, is the breadbasket of Europe and peace-loving people. So then this weekend I posted, Ukraine has been fighting for their very existence against an evil dictator. I see now the importance of the Ukrainian victory against Russia. I hope Trump and the people of the United States will lend their support.
Although other conservative voices remain against U.S. involvement in the country. Splits in Republican ranks are now obvious, an argument being made online that could help improve relations between two men who haven't always seen eye to eye. Richard Gaisford, Al Jazeera, Washington.
And joining me now to dig into this possible shift is Ambassador Kurt Volker. He is a former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations, and Sahel Khan, who is a former White House policy advisor for President George W. Bush. Thank you both for being with me. This is fascinating. I want to start with Loomer herself before we move on to MAGA and the rest of the Republican Party. But she has been one of the loudest voices in the MAGA movement, one of the fiercest and most active operators when it comes to behind-the-scenes staffing in the national security world. Sahel, she had a very hardened position when it came to Russia and Ukraine. What do you make of this road to Damascus conversion?
So Laura Loomer, no doubt, enjoys a special position of influence with this president and this administration. And like you said, there has been several prominent voices within both the influencer community as well as elected officials who have been critical of our support for Ukraine. And she has been one of those. That really reflects a divide between the MAGA movement on this issue that has been there from the very beginning, as there is on many other issues. Her switch here, her conversion, as it were, on the road to Damascus, really gives the president a little more room to continue aligning himself with the more traditional national security hawks within the GOP, who are supportive of Ukraine and supportive of continuing our financial and military aid to Ukraine. So it really is it really doesn't surprise me in that somebody who's as close as she is to the president is changing on the merits, perhaps because she wants to show her support for the president, to give the president more room to continue his support for Ukraine. So it doesn't really, to me, reflect a change on the grassroots level. Because as I talk to young influencers, they are growing in their numbers and their real unease with foreign aid in general, including for Ukraine. But it gives the president more leeway in the last 2 years that he has of his presidency to continue his support for Ukraine.
And probably the biggest reason for this flip, Ambassador Volker, is that she went on the ground. Yes. She went to Kyiv. President Zelenskyy was quite crafty. He invited her for a conversation that was then recorded. She experienced the horrors of an air raid siren, I understand. What do you make of this flip?
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly right. She didn't go there without expecting to have a more positive view. I think that she had been listening to friends of hers, to journalists, people who have spent time in Ukraine, and she understood that, okay, Russia's really waging a war of aggression. It is terrible for the Ukrainian people. Ukrainians are defending their freedom. There's a lot of parallels to that with America's own 250 story, where we were fighting for our independence against the British Empire 250 years ago. So I think she went there with a mind to say, okay, let me see this for myself. And as anyone who goes to Ukraine sees, it's a very large country. It's a beautiful country. It's got a very sophisticated, resilient, determined people. You can see yourself in them. You can think, if I lived here and they were attacking me, I would be fighting back, which is what the Ukrainians are doing. So I think she came away with that story. A couple of things around this as well. Before she went to Ukraine, you remember President Trump sat down with President Zelenskyy at the NATO summit. Mm-hmm. The first thing out of Trump's mouth when they sat down is, I like this guy. Very important, because when we're talking about the MAGA movement, and traditional Republicans have always been supportive of Ukraine and skeptical of Russia, but it was a signal to the MAGA movement that it's okay to support Ukraine. It's okay to like Zelenskyy. We may have our differences from time to time, but he went on to say they've got a great military, they're resilient people, they're fighting for their country, they're doing a great job. All of that is messaging for his own base back home.
Yeah, I really do want to highlight the shift in tone, because it has been quite remarkable, ups and downs to say the very least. He has shifted the rhetoric when it comes to this war in Ukraine. He went from fiercely critical and promises of ending this conflict to and then expressing frustration with both Kyiv and Moscow and the lack of progress in terms of the negotiations. But it does look like he may be warming up to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Take a listen.
We've been working very hard, very close. So we've actually known each other for a long time. We've been dealing with each other for a long time, and very well. We had a little negotiation spat, but that worked out great. I think for both countries, I think for the world, actually, beyond both countries. Man, and he's putting up one hell of a fight, and we'll see how that all turns out. We have great respect for the fight that Ukraine is putting up. It's pretty amazing, actually. We've actually developed a good relationship. It's hard to believe, right? From the Oval Office to now, I think we've developed a very good relationship. And
this is not the end.
No, this is going to be the beginning, maybe.
Yeah.
Just the beginning.
And Matthew Torres digs deeper into how Trump has changed his posture.
During his second presidential campaign, Trump said he could end the war within 24 hours if elected. He also criticized the billions of dollars the U.S. had sent to Ukraine, echoing many Republicans who argued the government was giving too much. A month into his second term, Trump sharply criticized Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy, calling him a dictator without elections, and warning he better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. That relationship became more tense during Zelenskyy's Oval Office visit, when Trump and Vice President Vance accused him of being disrespectful and ungrateful. Trump later temporarily paused military aid to Ukraine. Now, by late April, Trump's frustration shifted toward Moscow. After a deadly Russian attack on Kyiv, he posted, "Vladimir, stop. Let's get the peace deal done." A month later, Trump said Putin had gone absolutely crazy as Russia intensified its attacks. In June, after meeting Zelenskyy at the NATO summit, Trump's tone softened. He called the Ukrainian leader very nice and suggested sending additional air defense missiles. In August, Trump tried to broker a ceasefire during a summit with Putin in Alaska, but the talks ended without a breakthrough. Then in September came his biggest shift. After meeting Zelenskyy at the UN General Assembly, Trump suggested Ukraine could reclaim territory seized by Russia. And by December, the White House said Trump was extremely frustrated with both Russia and Ukraine as the war dragged on with no diplomatic progress. Now, as the war entered its fifth year, Trump's posture has become more favorable toward Ukraine. He announced plans to license Ukraine to produce its own missiles and back tougher Senate sanctions on Russia. Several House Republicans have also crossed party lines to support additional aid, though there is still opposition within the party.
Sahel, I want you to pick up on something you were just saying. Obviously, one person does not a movement make. You know, just Laura Loomer's conversion is not going to change everything in MAGA world. Even President Trump softening on President Zelenskyy is not going to change everything. We've seen divisions within MAGA before. So how much of an actual shift in this base do you think this is?
It does mark that the kind of America First wing, as it were, of the MAGA movement is on its back foot. Right? President Trump ran on the he ran from the beginning back in 2015 against forever wars. He even said that President Bush should have been impeached over the war in Iraq. And so he really kind of signaled to the base that he was going to be withdrawing from the international scene, both militarily and when it came to aid for other countries, including Ukraine, et cetera. Now you see that obviously we're bogged down in a war in Iran. That's continuing. That did not appear on the horizon for most MAGA supporters just 6-7 months ago. So you've seen that the president has changed and shifted when it comes to his foreign policy and his engagement with the world, as bumpy as it might be. That has been much to the chagrin of many MAGA influencers. So you've seen people like Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who have been defeated often over these related issues. Tucker Carlson has left the party and broken with the president. And so the kind of the America First MAGA wing has definitely been, it's on its back foot, and it's not as ascendant as it was before. But I would argue that this is temporary. And then again, if you talk to younger supporters within the MAGA movement, they still hold very firmly to a America First position. They're still supporting the president. Mm-hmm. They're not backing away, mm-hmm. but they are disappointed.
I mean, of course, we know that President Trump is quite mercurial. He can swing. Ambassador Volker, how much of this attitude that we're now hearing from the president do you think is due to the momentum that Ukraine has found on the battlefield?
That is a big part of it. President Trump likes to support a winner, and Ukraine has turned the war around and is looking like they will come out of this well in some way. So that's got to be a part of it. But I think another part of it is that he realizes that Putin has been playing him and lying to him consistently. So every time Putin talks to him, he promises he wants to negotiate, he wants peace, he wants a deal, and then he goes and does the opposite. And he bombs harder, he expands his demands rather than shrinks them, doesn't meet with Zelenskyy, doesn't say he'll ever meet with Zelenskyy. So I think President Trump is tired of the spin from Putin as well, and really just, basically has given up trying to cut a deal with Putin about mm-hmm. ending the war, because Putin isn't going to do it. And that has left him in the position of, he's not providing American taxpayer aid to Ukraine, right. but he is providing more rhetorical support and enabling Europeans and others to buy aid for Ukraine.
And that is something we should highlight. The American military support really has ground to a halt.
Yes, that's right. We have enabling support. So, for instance, we have intelligence satellites, and that provides a feed of information, and we share that with our allies, and they share it with Ukraine. When our allies buy American arms and ammunition, they ship it to Ukraine, and the U.S. military is part of that logistics chain. So there's a lot that we are doing to enable it, but we're not spending our own money to do it now.
I do want to show our viewers what we mean when we talk about the momentum and the state of the battlefield. Let's look at how this war has gone so far, because just before Russia's full-scale invasion back in February of 2022, Moscow had already annexed the Crimean Peninsula. That was back in 2014. And then Russian forces held the most territory just after that invasion in February of 2022. They came very close to the capital, Kyiv, but then they were forced to retreat because of Ukrainian drone attacks and attacks on the strained supply lines around the city. Since 2023, the front lines have remained mostly static, but the conflict has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, both Ukrainian and Russian, and of course forced millions of Ukrainians to flee their homes. So do you think what we're hearing from Trump now, is that relatively fair weather support? Will that change if Ukraine's fortunes change?
I think there's an element of the president obviously liking winners, no doubt about it. But I also think, as has been said, he has grown very weary of Putin's machinations when it comes to negotiating and then stopping the negotiations and not being very forthright or truthful with the president. And I also think, again, that the elected officials, particularly in the Senate, are very supportive of Ukraine. And so he's reflecting those that are advising him, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio and JD. JD has been, tacitly supportive. He's uncomfortable with some of the support, but still
moved away from some of his harshest skepticism.
That's right. That's exactly right. And of course, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has been very supportive. And so that really is a reflective of the people that he has assembled to continue advising him that he's going to continue again with the more traditional national security support. I think where this really will manifest itself is as we get into the presidential for 2028, which I know is not that far off. We will see where contenders like Vice President J.D. Vance, perhaps Marco Rubio, perhaps Ted Cruz, where they'll position themselves when it comes to foreign policy, including Ukraine.
I'm glad you brought up Capitol Hill, because Ambassador Volker, I wanted to ask you, what kind of changes are you seeing up there among Republicans?
Well, the most dramatic change, of course, was the passing of Lindsey Graham.
Right.
I went to the funeral service earlier this week. He was a very strong voice in favor of supporting Ukraine, sanctioning Russia. It sponsored the legislation that's now moving forward to put significant tariffs on countries that trade in Russian oil and gas. So he was really leading on this issue in the Senate. He won't be there to do this anymore. But there are, as we heard, there are several other senators who are also very supportive of Ukraine. And you can, Senator Risch, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Senator Wicker, the Armed Services Committee, Senator Dan Sullivan, and on and on. So there's going to be a lot of residual support there on Capitol Hill. And when you look at the election, as was mentioned here, or look at support on Capitol Hill, remember to always look at the broader spectrum of American opinion, not just the MAGA movement. MAGA movement might be 20% to 30% of the Republicans, and therefore, 10 to 15% of the country. The majority of people in the country, Republicans and Democrats, people voting for their senators or their members of the House, are broadly supportive of Ukraine, broadly skeptical of Russia. They don't want us to be fighting in the war, but they support the idea of strong national security, supporting our allies, supporting people who are fighting for their freedom. So that's what people running for office are going to have to bear in mind when they position themselves. I don't want to be off track from where the majority opinion is.
Yeah, and of course, people running for office are looking very closely at the numbers. I want to take a look at some of the numbers that we have in the public sphere. There was a recent Pew poll that around half of Democrats say that the U.S. is not doing enough to help Ukraine, while only 11% of Republicans are saying the same. And then a majority of Americans, 66%, say that they do not have confidence in Trump to handle the conflict in Ukraine. And then there's Ukraine's ambassador with interesting comments recently. She told Al Jazeera here in Washington that the shift isn't only in U.S. public opinion, but also in how Ukraine itself is approaching its relationship with the U.S. Take a listen.
Well, I'm noticing a shift definitely, and the polls show it. So over the at least for the whole year, I'm here. The polls show that there is a sustainable support among American people for Ukraine, more than 60%. There is a stable bipartisan support for Ukraine, including the issue of continuing providing Ukraine with necessary military capabilities. But I think there was a huge shift on our side as well. We started to build our policy and our relations with the United States in a totally different way, and it has engaged all the Ukrainian administration.
I was struck at the Lindsey Graham funeral about not only President Zelenskyy was there, but Sean Hannity, a standard bearer of the MAGA movement, was giving a eulogy and mentioned that President Zelenskyy was there. He said very glowing things about President Zelenskyy. Clearly, his stock is on the rise with those around Donald Trump in this town. What do you make of how Zelenskyy and those around him have approached this administration?
Well, yeah, they've learned a lot about how to deal with President Trump. And if you remember that terrible Oval Office meeting in February of last year, Zelenskyy made so many mistakes. Trump was teasing him a little bit, but they were okay, and they were then going to go have their private meeting and lunch. And Trump literally said, "Let's go have lunch." And J.D. Vance had not been on camera yet, and so he wanted to speak up and be on camera. And he said something innocuous, like, "Oh, President Trump's going to do a great job here. We're going to try diplomacy for a change." And President Zelenskyy should have just listened to that and said, "Okay, let's go to lunch."
Yeah.
Because Vance is not his counterpart, and you don't need to convince anybody, and Trump already signaled he's ready to go. Instead, he gets into an argument with J.D. Vance, then Trump starts defending Vance, and the whole thing went down, and they're shouting over each other, just a terrible thing. So that has not happened again. Zelenskyy has learned, I think the hard way, but he's learned, have a positive public discussion with President Trump. Thank the U.S., thank President Trump for what he's doing. Say that things are going well. Don't bring up difficult issues in front of the cameras, and then go off and have a serious discussion. And he's done that time and again now. They've met probably 6 times in the last year, and it has gone better each time.
That was truly one of the most extraordinary moments in all my years of covering foreign policy. Just unreal. Sahel, I want to ask you about the war in Iran and how that might be impacting things, impacting how the administration is feeling about Ukraine and how the base is feeling about Ukraine, because now we're in another war with Iran where Ukraine's enemy, Russia, is supporting the Iranians against American forces.
Right. There's no doubt that the Russian, closeness to Iran has also hurt those that were, some were trying, to defend Iran, if you remember several years ago. And there was, I thought it was overblown, the support for Russia within some of the MAGA circles. But there were voices who were saying things, in positive ways about Putin and trying to say, hey, look, Russia's not our enemy. I think that illusion has now been largely dissipated, partially because of where Russia has stood in other conflicts, including in their support for Iran. The MAGA movement is continuing to support the president. They are very nervous about this ongoing conflict in Iran. Like the president, they want it to wrap up, and they're hoping that each time there is another round of negotiations that they actually stick and that all sides adhere to the agreements. So that's yet to be seen, but there's no doubt there's fatigue from the president on down for the ongoing conflict. Obviously, promises were made to President Trump that were not true and did not hold true. I remember these same conversations 20 plus years ago in the Bush White House. We didn't take it seriously then. Unfortunately, we were goaded into this conflict, and now we're looking desperately for a way out.
Even as President Trump says nicer things about President Zelenskyy, we're still not hearing any criticism towards President Putin. But as we watch this rapprochement between Ukraine and the Trump administration, Ambassador Volker, is there any indication that Putin is recognizing that?
I think so. It's always a challenge to sort of follow what was happening with Russia and inside Russia, because they do a deliberate and very good job of projecting the opposite. So Putin wants to convey strength. He wants to, like Captain America, I can do this all day. That's what he wants to convey. The reality is he knows that his finances are hurting. His ability to recruit for the war is hurting. He can't recruit as many people for the battlefield as he is losing on the battlefield. So this is a long-term erosion of the Russian military. He knows all that. He also sees that he was not invited to the NATO summit in Ankara. Zelenskyy was, by Erdogan. Erdogan, one of his friends, is actually working to help Ukraine here. You see the Europeans providing a 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine so they can buy weapons and ammunition. You see the U.S., as we said earlier, not removing any of the enabling support that we provide that allows these things to get to Ukraine. You had President Trump in Ankara saying, we're going to give you a license to produce Patriot missiles in Ukraine because we can't produce them fast enough and we need ours, but we'll give you a license, you can produce them. These are all things that Putin is going to see and say, okay, I see the world is closing in around Ukraine and against me.
It's a fascinating evolution in this relationship, but obviously very far away from actually ending the war as President Trump promised to do. Ambassador Kurt Volker, Sahel Khan, thank you both for joining me today. Appreciate it. And that's all from myself and the team here in Washington. Handing back to Richard Gaisford and Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha.
Well, that's it for this edition of This is America. On Friday's program, we'll be looking at the potential impacts of a widening war in the Middle East. That's 18:30 GMT, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time here in the United States. For now, though, from Washington, D.C., it's goodbye.